ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to MEBAC for inviting me and WingX to make this presentation on North Africa. Statistics and numbers sounds extremely dry, so I shall try and make it a little bit more exciting along the strapline for WingX, which is actionable market intelligence. We provide data and market intelligence and consulting for global business aviation markets. So this seems to work. We've provided data up to and including September 2013. So you'll find as we go through this, the numbers slightly differ from the press release you have, and that's because happily it's updated right up till last week. Now we're looking at the NAR part of MENA, which is the collection of countries along the bottom. Morocco, Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Mauritania, Sudan, Djibouti, and a collection of small Comoros, Mayotte, and Madagascar, small countries. This first chart shows business aviation activity. We monitor all business aviation aircraft, single and multi-engine, IFR operations. So this shows that in terms of departures from this region, we have seen over the last almost 10 years a big increase up to 29, and then rather a stagnation. And what you will all be familiar with is that the big increase has been offset by the regional instability in North Africa. That between 2009 and I suppose a low point 2011, let's hope it's a low point, we saw a 25% fall in activity. Given the scale of the changes across, particularly the larger markets in Tunisia and Libya and Egypt, apart from Morocco, that is, that's not surprising. In fact, 25% is probably less than you would expect. So let's look at the year to date, 2013. Well, there's a big red circle for North Africa for our group because year to date they're almost 3%. Activity in the region is almost 3% down on 2012. But in fact, that's less than activity has fallen in Europe, which is a little bit over 3% down on 2012, with most major markets in Europe losing up to 5% in activity. And in fact, there have been some growth points. Both Egypt and Morocco have recorded growth year to date compared to 2012. Obviously, this region is not doing as well as the Middle East, where growth is moving along very fast, or the CIS, where there is marginal growth so far this year. Before we move on, though, the background to this map is quite important because the brown colors, and the browner they get, is an indication of forecast economic activity over the next 10 years. So you can see that in North Africa, there is, these are data from the IMF, there is an indication of 3 to 5% and over GDP growth. So that is going to be a rock-solid foundation for future development of business aviation activity in this region. So now we're turning to the individual countries, and we can see that Morocco is the big market. What we're looking at here, in addition, are the connections between these countries that we've grouped within North Africa and the rest of the world. What's interesting is in the top two markets, in Morocco and Egypt, most of the connections, and this is over the last few years, most of the connections are non-European destinations. In fact, it's in the third and fourth and fifth markets in Tunisia, Algeria, and Libya where most of the destinations are European. So this is quite interesting because I think it shows that North Africa is not just a gateway to Europe, but it's a gateway to other regions of the world as well, particularly Morocco. Let's look a bit more detail, and this is 2013, and this is a number of specific destinations from our North African group. And as I'm struggling to read the country names from here, you'll be struggling from back there. So let me call a few of them out. From our regions, the most popular destination is Morocco. So that shows that domestic traffic in Morocco is most important, even though it's slightly fallen year to date. Then there's France, obviously a strong Francophone influence in North Africa, as with Spain. But the one that stands out there is number 4, which is Russia, where there has been well over 50% growth in 2013 year to date compared to 2012 from our region. And there are a number of other countries down there. Many of them are European, but there are a number that are outside Europe as well, particularly in the Middle East. So that shows a growing connectivity, not just in Europe, but with other regions. So let's look at some of the airports that are most active, and this is 2013. You will see that the most active market, unsurprisingly, is Morocco, with the likes of Rabat and Marrakech and Casablanca generating the most activity. There is also quite intensive activity in Tunisia and growing activity in Egypt, particularly in Hurghada. Again, what I'm showing here is in terms of departures year to date compared to 2012. So that is January to September 2013 compared to January to September 2012. So this chart looks at those airports in terms of what kind of trips took place. Were they charter trips, were they private trips, or were they other? By other, we largely cover government, but it also covers some maintenance trips, some training trips as well. Now, there's quite a lot of disparity here. Clearly, different airports play different roles. Right at the top there, Rabat, there is a strong role in government activity. In Hurghada and in Fida, there is a strong role in charter. Casablanca and Tangier, there's a strong role for private activities. So across that board, when you have a chance later to look, you will see there's quite a bit of disparity. Let's look in a little bit more detail at the city pairs, and first in terms of charter. What city pairs are being connected by the charter trips from North Africa? Well, here you will see that, again, there's a lot of activity between Morocco and Spain and France. That is mostly short-haul trips. But growing fast are the charter trips between locations Hurghada and Cairo and points in Egypt. You also see strong connections between Tunisia and points in Central Europe, particularly in Germany. Then let's look at the private city pairs. On the right, by the way, are the number of trips so far this year. And you can see that the concentration in terms of private flights is actually double the concentration we just saw in the charter flights. I'll just go back to remind you. So it's about 70 or 80, I think, so far this year. And here you've got about 150 so far this year on these top routes. There's a lot of concentration here. A lot of the activity here is Morocco domestic. They're also quite active business aviation routes between some Med islands, some Med countries, and we see down there Nouakchott to the Canaries as well, which is likely to be, some of those are likely to be more the leisure trips than the business trips. So let's turn to the operators behind all this activity. This shows the number of registered operators in our North African countries, in our surveyed countries. And this is over the last 10 years. And what's striking here is that apart from Morocco, there has not been very much growth in the number of registered operators in this region. Within the circles are the number of aircraft that are operated by these operators, and you will notice also that the fleet size per operator on average is really pretty small. You can take Egypt, it's actually got one less registered operator than it did, I believe the beginning of the survey is 2000, so it's lost an operator, and there are 10 operators, 39 aircraft. So these are pretty small fleets. And that contrasts with the more mature European and Middle Eastern markets, where the more mature market has given rise to large-scale operations. And that suggests that most of the charter trips, in particular in this region, are being conducted by Middle Eastern and European operators, the likes of Royal Jet and Comlux, for example. So let's look at the fleet behind the operators. Well, the fleet doubled between 2000 and 2009, 2010, with a big increase in the latter half of that first decade. And then, unsurprisingly, along with activity, it somewhat stagnated the last few years. Now, the 130-odd aircraft is a relatively small fleet. I've picked out on the bottom there a number of European markets, and we can also see the Middle Eastern market. All of these have substantially more aircraft. Even if we take a relatively small European market like Austria, 249 aircraft, it's got substantially more than those registered in our North African region. Also notable is the age. At 15 years, the average age of the fleet in North Africa is pretty elderly. Again, compare it to the small blue squares along the bottom, which suggest that number of European countries are below that. Germany, UK, not much, but certainly when you get to the Middle East, you're talking an average of under 10 years. Let's turn to the OEMs, that is the airframe OEMs, which are most prevalent in North Africa. And what we've shown here is the OEMs on the left, the leading OEMs, who control 95% of the fleet, or who represent 95% of the fleet here in North Africa. And we see a very big influence from Hawker and Cessna, with newcomers like Bombardier coming into the market more recently. So let's look at that OEM fleet in terms of activity, what we saw before, just to remind you in case you missed it, going too fast. This is the growth in the actual number of aircraft representing those OEMs. Here we're seeing the activity of each of those fleets. And we see a couple of fleets with declining activity, Dassault, Piper. We see others